But my name is Alex Padilla. I'm California's still relatively new Secretary of State. I want to welcome all of you to the Secretary of State building, home of the California Museum, and of course the California Archives, for today's celebration of California Admission Day, informally known as Birth Day here in California. Today, we the people, we hear that term a lot, we the people, we are the people, we're gathered here today in honor of California's 1849 Constitution, the very founding document that led to California being admitted as the 31st state in the year 1850. In a few moments, we'll hear from our very special guest, the California Chief Justice, Tani Cantil-Sakauye, about the significance of our Constitution to this concept that we call democracy. But first, we wanted to start the program, this wouldn't be a birthday party without some singing, with a tribute to the great nation that California joined 165 years ago. Please welcome the Sheldon High School Choir from Sacramento, who are going to lead us in the national anthem. Thank you to the Sheldon High School Choir. You're not going away. I think there's a few more songs ahead in the program. But want to also acknowledge that today there's several reasons to celebrate. As I mentioned, it was 165 years ago today that California was admitted to the Union. It took an act of Congress, and it happened just 2 years after gold was discovered in them there hills here in California. And it was only about 2 years also after an agreement was signed between Mexico and the United States, ending the U.S.-Mexico war. Historians will recall that California was admitted to the Union as a free state, as part of the Compromise of 1850, when the nation was in the midst of a great debate between free states and slave states. The second reason for celebration is that 165 years ago, the California legislature enacted its very first law. Chapter 1 of the Statutes of 1850 directed the Secretary of State to safely keep and preserve the records of government. Thus was born the California Archives, an important function that remains part of the Secretary of State's responsibility to this day. And of course, locally, we're celebrating the rare public display of the Archive's most precious document, California's original 1849 Constitution. It's over here to my left, safely protected by the California Highway Patrol and behind the glass case, but it's done in a way where you can, as I did just before 10 o'clock this morning, take a selfie with the state constitution Just tag us when you post and tweet. But back 165 years ago, it was the convening of 48 delegates to the California Constitutional Convention that took place not here in Sacramento, but in Monterey for 37 days before the signing of the final document. I think really putting a challenge to the people in the state capitol today as they're approaching this end of session thing. That's only a few days, 37 days convening to build consensus around the founding document of a new state in the nation. We're pleased to have on display some historic photos from that very place in Monterey where this all happened. It's known as the Colton Hall Museum nowadays, and you'll see pictures of the exterior, the interior, both surrounding the Constitution as well as on my right to your left over here. The precious parchment document that is the Constitution itself is also special because it established the very framework for the great golden state that we all love. But it's also special and unique across the nation for one more reason. We have both an English and a Spanish version. You know, people talk about diversity and so many languages being spoken in California today. It's truly our history. It's who we are from the outset as a state. Recognizing California as a bilingual state due to its prior history as part of Mexico is captured in Section 21 of Article 11 in the Constitution that decreed that all laws must be submitted in Spanish as well as in English. And so both the English Constitution as well as the proclamation in Spanish are both on display today, side by side. And of course, any historian or a student of history and government knows that among the most significant provisions of the California Constitution, as it is with our nation's Constitution, is the separation of powers. There's 3 branches of government, right? And raise your hand if you can recite the 3 branches of government. All right, I won't put you all on the spot here. I'll let you off the hook. There is the executive, there's the legislative, and there's the judicial branch, right? Over the course of my career, I've had a chance to serve in 2 of those 3 branches, the legislative and now the executive. Well, I'm delighted to introduce our honored guest today, who's a tremendous leader in that 3rd branch, the equally important judiciary. She's a Sacramento native, a graduate of UC Davis Law School, a former district attorney, a trial and appellate judge for more than 20 years before being named California's 28th Chief Justice in the year 2011. And as if her day job didn't keep her busy enough, she makes it a point to raise awareness of civic education and civic engagement. She has founded the Power of Democracy, an initiative to fulfill that mission and that vision of hers. And I'm so grateful she's asked me to be a part of her efforts. We're thankful that she is here today to join us in this celebration. Please join me in welcoming California Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakauye.
Good afternoon. What a privilege it is to be here to share this podium with such a fine leader that you have in Secretary Padilla, and how he and I share the same dream about making that Constitution available to you as a power, as a strength, as you exercise the rights guaranteed underneath it, and as you become leaders and voices in your community. So 165 years ago, California became a state, was admitted to the Union, and who knew 165 years ago what a force California would be, and how that Constitution is relied upon every day in the courts and quoted and also looked at by the United States Supreme Court. And what I like to think about 165 years ago is the vision and symbolism of our founders of that Constitution, because at the same convention, they adopted the California seal. And on that seal, as many of you know, is a woman and she is seated with a spear and a helmet. And you see on that same seal a bear and some grapes and often an owl. So when you look at that, people have often said, is that Lady Justice who sits on the seal? But in fact, it is the goddess Minerva. And the reason Minerva sits on the California seal is because she, like California, was born whole. California, unlike any other state in the Union, was not a territory before it became a state. As Secretary Padilla said, California became a state after the gold rush 2 years in the Treaty of Hidalgo, negotiated between California and Mexico. And so if you know the story of Jupiter, he married a warrior goddess. He became a little concerned that she might be too powerful for him. So he swallowed her whole. And she was none too pleased about being swallowed whole. So in his body, she continued to make weapons. And one day he had a splitting headache, and out of his head comes a fully born daughter, Minerva, armed in warrior goddess clothes. And so California adopts her as its seal because California was born whole as well, completely born here as not a territory but a state. And so to me that symbolizes so much about what makes California unique. California is a leader state. It's the most diverse state. It certainly is the cutting edge state. And how is all of that possible? And so I will argue to you every day that the reason California is a leader, the reason we have the fine executive leadership that we have and the legislative leadership and the judicial leadership is because of the Constitution. If you look at the California Constitution, every power emanates from that document. Every statute, every legislative action, every executive action, every judicial action can be traced back to authority in the Constitution that permits that act. And so let me also say, frankly, that it is the wisdom of that Constitution that set up 3 branches of government, not 4, because 4 would end up in a stalemate, 2 against 2. So it was 3 to balance and check the authority and power of each other. But apart from the statewide branch of civics and the Constitution, what I try to pursue with the able-bodied leadership of Secretary Padilla is to treat and teach civics to K through 12. And that is to teach students through our civics initiative with also our partner, Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson, that civic learning, civic engagement needs to be taught in the schools because it's leadership training. It teaches you about the world around you and how decisions are made and who pulls the levers. And frankly, you will ask the question, why shouldn't I pull those levers? Why shouldn't I have a say in this? And it is through the Constitution and through civics engagement that you learn those skills and you learn the structure. And more important in K through 12, as you engage in a civics project, what you learn are the most important skills for leadership. You learn collaboration. You have to learn to get along. You learn negotiation. You learn critical thinking. You learn debate. You learn current events. You become aware of the world around you. And the more you have that you learn about that, the more you have a stake in the future. The more you become involved and want to say in that because you are part of that community. So civics means a great deal to us here. It is what started, frankly, 165 years ago. It's what we try to improve upon. It's personal to me, coming from Sacramento, from humble beginnings in high school, not talented enough to sing in choir, but hopeful that one day I could have a voice. And so it is through our partnership with the Power of Democracy, working with also Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Torlakson and leaders in the community, that we are bringing to your schools and local districts education about civics and programs and clubs, and where we reward high schools for their civics engagement, for them learning to create a model that permits students to engage in micro-civics, that gets them thinking critically, that then expands to them in local communities, colleges, and universities. Let me say that we have learned several things about civics education and the push in schools. First of all, it decreases dropout rates. Second, it engages students in their local community. It also engages student relationships with one another, in my view, promoting diversity and conversation and tolerance and ideas. But we've also learned that civics and students who are exposed to them in K through 12 also, in fact, carry that interest into adulthood and become leaders in their communities. And now we have focused also on adult K through 12, looking at California as diverse as it is, with so many people coming to this state, not necessarily from a functioning democracy. We are focusing on trying to bring civics education and engagement through the Foundation for Democracy and Justice, a nonprofit organization, to bring educational materials to those who wish to teach to others. And with that, we have the help of, frankly, teachers and business leaders and lawyers and professors. Our executive director, Sosan Madnat, is here also, part of the organization. And together, there's so much effort to bring you leadership skills in California so you can be the future leaders and take our place, because we are merely stewards. So I close today with saying to you something about this 1849 bilingual California Constitution. And let me read Article 1, Section 1. All men are by nature free and independent, and have certain inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety and happiness. So wise were those founders. And I turn this now to Secretary Padilla.
Thank you, Chief Justice. In keeping with that spirit, she read Article 1, Section 1 of the original Constitution in English, and to maintain historical integrity of the celebration, I'll read the same article and section in Spanish. I see a Univision mic on the floor. Should I pick it up for you guys? All right. Better audio for tonight's telecast. Artículo 1, Declaración de Derechos, sección número 1. Todos los hombres son, por naturaleza, libres e independientes y tienen ciertos derechos inalienables, entre ellos los de gozar y defender la vida y la propiedad, y de adquirir, poseer y proteger la libertad, solicitar y obtener seguridad y felicidad. So there you have it, a historically accurate rendition. And just one more thing before we get to this beautiful, beautiful cake here to celebrate. A few thank yous for everybody who made today's celebration possible. Acknowledge that the 1849 version of the Constitution, if you really read every word and letter in it, made reference to all men, but at the time, the provisions discriminated against Native Americans and other non-white Californians. Thankfully, over time, in large part to our judicial system, those have been addressed, and we are in the process of expanding our constitutional rights and franchise and not discriminating. So as a thank you to our partners, I want to recognize first the California Archives, led by none other than Chief Archivist Nancy Lenoyle and her able team. Thank you, Nancy. And they stand at the ready to lead anyone who's interested to the 4th floor, where they've just today opened a new exhibit dedicated to the secretaries of states over time, from the founding of our state to today. And who's the governor right now? Jerry Brown. He was once upon a time a secretary of state. So if you'd like to see that exhibit in the archives division, Nancy, raise your hand one more time. That's who to follow. I also want to thank the California Museum for their partnership and Executive Director Amanda Meeker. Where's Amanda? There she is. And the museum team, who are able to lead you into the museum up until 5:30 today, where there's an exhibit on the first floor commemorating the same thing, California statehood 165 years ago. I want to thank the California Foundation for Democracy and Justice and Executive Director So-Sun, you were introduced a few minutes ago, for being our primary partner in today's event. The California State University Sacramento Center for California Studies, and the Executive Director, Steve Boylard. Where's Steve? Back there. Everybody say thank you to Steve for sponsoring the cake. And this reception. Colton Hall Museum and the curator, Dennis Copeland. Is Dennis with us today? If not, just think good thoughts. Colton Hall, as I mentioned, sort of augmented the Constitution with images of Colton Hall, where the Constitution was drafted and the convention took place. Round of applause for our choir in Sheldon High School. And for curriculum specialist Frank Peasy from Sacramento County Office of Education. Thank you for making this happen. And finally, I want to thank all of you for attending, not just to celebrate, but to pay tribute to our founding documents, our democracy, and the best way to ensure that we don't take these rights for granted and that we defend and protect these rights for future generations is by exercising them, right? Our freedom of speech, our freedom to assemble, our right to vote. So with that, thank you all once again for coming. Chief Justice, will you join me in, I see a knife. Let's cut this cake. Thank you, everybody, and I'll turn it back over to the choir to lead us in the state song.